Hi, everyone, and welcome to Total Education with Neil, with my co-host Jared. And again, you can go to my website, totaltutor.net, for more information. Twitter, Total Tutor Neil S. Haley. Facebook, LinkedIn, Neil Haley. And I am exhausted and tired. I can't believe it's close to spring already for our viewers watching the program. And we're continuing to go into early childhood education. And what we're really looking at in early childhood education is the youngest of young and cognitive. And we were talking about, and I want to welcome Jarrett back to the program. We're talking about John Watson, and kind of tell us where we were at in that point of view from the last time in our discussion about teaching cognitive.
Well, what we had ended with was some of John Watson's experiments that he had started at Johns Hopkins University as a resident, and he really started to transform the way we began to look at infants and what they come into the world with. So many people thought that children were either just miniature adults or they came into this world almost as a blank slate, that there was nothing going on, and that everything had to be learned, taught, learned, and experienced. Watson began to notice through his work as a behavioral pediatrician, he began to notice that infants were being born into this world with a set of amazing skills that were perfectly suited to their
Right.
lives. And even though that was the beginning of what he started, his work led other doctors, scientists, researchers, and now, of course, with the ability to map the brain the way we can through imaging, high-tech imaging, we really have learned that Watson's work was really accurate. Now, some of his later ideas, they were a little bit, let's say, unique, but, and in fact, Watson went on, this won't be a whole show about John Watson, but he went on to actually have a career in advertising, and some of those same marketing ideas that he learned by watching infants, he moved over into a very lucrative field in profession of advertising. But again, what he began noticing was physically infants were very well adapted for their new environment, but cognitively they were adapted to their new environment. Their cries had meanings. The reflexive nature, even though it was reflexive, and we know that means built in, born in, their reflexive behaviors also had cognitive meaning. And we left off the show with that beautiful statement that he had spoken about in a speech where he talked about when he gave the baby formula, the infant formula, how the infant stopped crying, the breathing became regulated, and the baby grabbed the lapel of his science jacket, and that was an amazing. Even John Watson was very touched by that, and he wrote about it and he talked about it. But
almost a Pavlov's dog in certain aspects, in a certain way at that point, and not reflexive in a way, but ultimately seeing.
And you're right, and certainly Watson was influenced by Pavlov and the behavioral therapists, scientists that were before him, but he took it to the next level. And what he did is he opened up the whole concept of Skinner to come later, who was a behavioralist, but he opened up the concept that cognitively infants are pretty smart and what they can do, and the way adults respond to that infant then connects the next set of relationships and the next cognitive steps that come later. So the infant begins to expect that reaction from the adult. Now that's relationship, that's social, but it's cognitive in that it becomes learned. And the infant responds to the cues that the adult gives, the adult responds to the cues that the infant is sending out. So it's really amazing stuff. And I'm going to jump in here. I know that this show, but the influence of this show, and this is totally anecdotal for our audience, but after last week's show, I get really excited and I go out and I start writing some more for our book that we're putting together based on our show. I happen to be at a little kind of diner, and using my headset to kind of dictate the show notes into our book form, and the waitress, was just getting like a pop and a little bowl of soup, and
Right.
the waitress overheard me talking into the microphone. And she actually sat down and said, I have a 4-year-old, and she said, just listening to you, she said, I couldn't help but listening to what you were saying into your microphone. And she said, it was really amazing what I heard you talking about and how special the relationship can be and how important it is. And she said, I went and called my mother just to see how he was doing and had him get on the phone and talk to me. So that's the emotional influence that I think we've seen our show have.
Absolutely, and definitely. And there's not that many formats out there. You might have Dr. Laura providing advice, or you have different people that are, psychologists or psychiatrists providing advice on TV and radio, but not to the point of parenting and education.
Right.
Like
Not
teachers
with the
and
approach
parenting.
we're doing. Right.
The approach is more you're the parenting, I'm parenting, but then we're also looking at the teaching end of things and of our developmental birth to 3. Now, the process, if I'm trying to remember, even from last week, isn't that sad? But again, it'll be on March's show because we're recording every month. The thing I think about, Jarrett, is we're starting with in the beginning when I talked about reaction and how parents act and interact with the kids when they're babies and how they react and how the sleep patterns and all these different areas. That's all cognitive. So, for example, mom, it's much more difficult if mom is nursing to get the baby not to just say, I have 24 hours a day, 7 days a week feedings. So I'll go ahead and do a shift where I'll go downstairs, maybe feed the baby a bottle. I don't care what people say, well, if you're breastfeeding, you should never give a bottle. No, you can pump, but ultimately also you can give a bottle. They feel that interaction that mom's in the room and they're ready to feed. If they're not, they'll sleep. They'll get those opportunities. So sleep patterns is a key component in this beginning part. And I think people listening, watching this show would say, oh my gosh, I don't get any sleep. Especially when we talk about the baby and sleep. And that's such a cognitive process because they're thinking, they're understanding sleep schedule, they're looking at their hierarchy of needs, of Maslow.
Of course, and that is so important what you just mentioned. Remember when the fetus, the baby was in the womb, they slept whenever they want. That child did not run on anybody's clock but their own. And now when they are born, we are asking that child, that infant who did everything on their own terms, to now fit into our schedules. And it's simply the way the world works. I imagine in other cultures, in some places of the world, an infant, a newborn, may not be expected to stay awake during the day and fall asleep at night. Depending on the sun and how the environment is in those other areas. But here and in so many places, every place really, we ask that infant to start to blend into our world. And you're right, that it is absolutely cognitive. Is there some adaptive there? Of course. But adaptive is so connected. The way we ask a child to adapt to our environment is so connected to the cognitive approach that what we're doing. So absolutely, you mentioned about the feeding. And as therapists, Neil, we always talked about with families, let's set aside the guilt that you have. You wanted to breastfeed. You wanted to nurse. It did not work out for your family. Okay, let's deal with that. Let's set aside the guilt that mother might be feeling.
But it also you can supplement.
Well, exactly, and that's what we talked about. So I heard you talk about a little bit of, we wanted to do this, and there's people out there that say you can't do both. And as we talked about on the show, we know that you can do both. And we know that almost anything can happen in a positive and unfortunately in a negative way. But as therapists, we talk so much about with parents, let's set aside that guilt, whether it's daycare guilt, working evenings, whatever they have to do to manage their home. Let's accept what we have and let's develop strategy. So I like what you said. What you said is, we're pumping, we're putting, maybe we use some formula, but we're pumping and we're storing, and that way you get to participate.
Basically, the fact is, we're thinking about this whole situation is that the reaction of the child, they have a notebook. They have their own little notebook as a baby, even in the womb. And then when they're born, that they're jotting things down in their little brains saying, well, this is how mom reacts, this is how dad reacts, this is how the siblings react, this is how everyone reacts. And this is all cognitive of a process. And the more you talk to them, so we're talking about feedings. That's a great cognitive skill to jump to right now after I talked about lack of sleep. You cannot just feed them. Even if you're giving them eye contact, that's part of the cognitive process at that age, for sure, because you might be tired and you don't want to keep them up. But at times, really interacting, really talking to them, telling them how much they love them, all these different things, so key, right?
Of course it is, and you touched again on so many components of what you mentioned Maslow and the hierarchy of needs. Well, we know that feeding and sleep, but feeding is the priority for an infant, and what a perfect opportunity to use again an everyday routine many times during the day, especially with a newborn, for feeding. And here's a perfect example of what an infant can start to do. And I've seen this as early as 2 months with children, with infants. When that parent is able to really focus and communicate and build a cognitive and connection with that infant, I have seen infants who will start to imitate if the mom or the dad or caregiver just makes some very simple facial gestures, open, close their mouth, pucker the lips, blink their eyes. Now keep in mind, this infant cannot see themselves, and even if they could, they wouldn't know what was going on in that mirror. I have seen infants who have imitated those very same gestures, facial gestures, at 2 months of age. Now, 2 months is further along than a newborn, but it starts at infancy. It starts at that newborn period.
When we get back, more Total Education with Neil with Jarrett, and we're going to really delve into more of this cognitive, because this is a process. We talk about all the different areas of needs: feeding, changing diapers, doing these. Some of the same stuff we talked about in other areas, but now we're just thinking about how this brain works, because the way the brain works utilizes all the other areas: the adaptive, the behavioral, the emotional, social, the behavioral, the speech, the occupational, all those areas. But cognitive is so important. We'll be back in just a moment with Total Education with Neil.
We had been called up for the first time. Wildfires were getting close to homes. At that moment, I got my first taste of just how important the Guard is.
Be there for your community at NationalGuard.com.
Getting old is horrible, okay? Horrible.
You're not old.
Oh, Melissa, come on, look at me, grow up. The only men that hit on me these days are undertakers.
You know, I don't want to talk about this.
You've got to understand what's going to happen. You've got to understand my needs. You've got to understand my wants.
No, la, 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 la.
Don't give me la, 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 la.
I don't. I can't.
Talk
do this.
to your family about aging, even if they're not ready to listen.
No matter who you are, it's not easy talking about aging. For help, go to voa.org/talk. A message from Volunteers of America.
From Maine to Maui, thousands of high school students across the country are getting in on the action by volunteering in their communities.
Action teams of high school students are joining Volunteers of America and Major League Baseball players to help train and inspire the next generation of volunteers.
It's easy to start an action team at your school, so you too can get in on the action.
Are you in? Get in on the action at actionteam.org.
We're back to Total Education and Neil, and we're with Jarrett, and we're talking about, again, the whole situation about the cognitive ability of babies and how do they interact, how they understand, and how they learn all the different processes of how they think. And cognitive is something that you, like we talked about, all these behaviorists that we've discussed and how they react in different things. Sleep's one thing. The reaction of the parents is another thing. And I think we touched upon that on the last show about the reaction because we talk about lack of sleep. But let's look at their needs. We talked about feeding. Now let's thinking of clothing. Let's just think about diaper changing. Mm-hmm. And what types of strategies would you use, Jarrett, in a diaper change?
Again, now this is a perfect opportunity. It would be a little bit early, but we start this at infancy. You know, when the infant is first brought home, you're starting to introduce peekaboo. This is even before the infant can get his or her little hands and arms up to their face and pull down the cloth. Have the parent cover themselves with the clean and fresh diapering cloth. Pull it away. Talk to the baby. What we're beginning to do now, and this is our audience who's been a part of our show for so long now. We've talked so much that there's no abstract thought in an infant. Everything is concrete. It has to be touched, heard, tasted, and so everything that you do with that infant, that newborn, needs to be concrete. That child needs to see it right in front of them, touch it right in front of them, hear it, taste it. That's why they put everything in their mouth. But take that opportunity at a diaper change. Cover your face, cover the newborn's face. Don't leave the cover on too long for a newborn because they actually may get frightened. But do that with themselves. They begin cognitively, they learn the rules of play. Oh, I know it's going to happen next.
But what about when they're screaming and crying? And
well, that's not the time to be doing it.
So we're looking at more 2 months.
Absolutely.
Because month they still are just having difficulty with those diaper changes.
I'm glad that you mentioned that because one of the things that I always talk to parents about, especially the parents that were bringing their babies home, is that you have a cycle with children, with infants, newborns, that we call the calm state, and that's when you want to be doing these activities, when they're calm, when they're satisfied. Let's go back to what Watson was saying. The time to play with your infant is not when they're screaming to be fed.
When do you think that would end? When is that going to end? I mean, with Xavier, it just seems like because they're so hungry and you're changing them a certain time and you're wanting them to sleep, when the sleep schedule gets to a point where you're just looking to do a diaper change that's not a diaper change based on they're waking up and they're starving.
Neil,
you got to move quickly.
Right. A great question that you just raised. When do you do this? As Watson learned, right after you've fed that newborn. And that's when parents will, a lot of times they'll say, well, but they fell asleep. You have a brief window before they fall asleep where they're calm, they're satisfied. Now that begins to change as their brain becomes more mature, as their nervous system becomes more mature, and that newborn is able to regulate better. They will stay up longer. They will react better to what they're doing. Keep this in mind too. The infant has to use a tremendous amount of energy to eat. And so that's a physical exertion for them. So it makes sense that the newborn falls asleep. But for our audience, for our parents out there, watch for that calm state, that quiet, calm state. That's the time to not let them go to sleep. That's the time to interact with them, play with them, do peekaboo. We know what this looks like. If your infant is fussy, tired, hungry, satisfy their needs. And then when they're
I'm glad you're
calm
saying
and quiet.
I'm learning a lot just because in a lot of ways I didn't work with those little ones when I was a developmental therapist. Could you imagine
That's
a
one of the
7-footer
greatest
knocking
things to
on
do.
the door and say, "Hi, I'm here to play with your newborn."
It was one of my favorite things to do.
But you are a little bit more of not an intimidating factor. Could you imagine me walking in and saying, "Okay, can I have the one that you've just give me the baby"?
Right, you would hold it right in your hands.
So I'm learning a lot from Jarrett because he's very good at this, especially when he's dealt with premature children, babies, and things like that. But when I forget these things and say, "Well, this is when I need to talk to them," it just seems like I'm always in when it's chaos and you got to quickly change and different things. But to talk to them, and then when you're feeding them, even though it's 3 o'clock in the morning, figure out that way of feeding. And so those are the things
Do
I
your
got to
best.
put in my mental net. So we talked about feeding, changing. Now a lot of cognitive stuff can deal with the same thing. We're going to finally get them to a point where they're awake, which is probably, I'd say, where they're finally starting to be awake most of the times a month and a half. Am I right on that track record?
Right.
About a month, they're still sleepy a lot at times when we're awake.
Oh, sure. They're going to sleep probably 3/4 of their day at that point. Not long.
No.
But 2 hours
Every 2
here,
hours or
yes.
2 hours there, and yeah.
And again, that actually here we talk about the amazing built-in abilities of a child, an infant. They need that. That is building their nervous system. They are giving their brain enough time to rest. There are so many things going on in that newborn's life right now. They need that rest. But you're right. A month and a half, 2 months, you're seeing the sleep cycle change. For those parents that are lucky, the sleep cycle might change to, wow, they sleep 4 hours at night before they wake up and need that 4 a.m. feeding.
I'm happy with 4 or 5, but that's what I normally get.
You might get there. But you're right. At a month and a half, 2 months, the child now, the infant has begun to adjust their schedule, and that is actually perfectly suited because now the child will be awake longer in the day. That's the best opportunity to build in those cognitive experiences. And now here's where you're seeing the child's memory start to take hold. At 2 months of age, an infant, and I've seen this happen and it's scientifically documented too, an infant can begin to recognize the immediate surroundings.
Yes.
They can begin to know their room. And if a parent is having that child in their room with them, I applaud that. They've got their own crib, they're there.
Yes.
That's terrific too. They will begin to recognize the surroundings of that room that they spend most of the time in. So there's memory being built in.
Exactly. So when you're talking about the cognitive, one of the strategies that I will implement is put them, again, allow them to finally be on the floor. Please, this is going to be so hard with my 4 other children. I just don't think it's going to be possible at this point, and that's why the swing. But you find a time, maybe when they're all napping, to get the baby on the floor, get one of those activity centers that we have where, and then they can look up, and then that's time that's creating a lot more cognitive. We also talked about, belly to back to belly, things like that. But this is the time where you're introducing picture cards, so the black and white cards, so that they're able to start to focus on pictures and stuff, because they only can see black and white till when?
It really depends. The color starts to begin to manifest itself with ocular control, probably in the first half year or the second half year of life. But infants are already beginning to be able to focus in on detail, close. So, but detail at a very early age, and that's a hard one to actually pin down and say this is when it absolutely happens. But I would say to our audience, watch your child, watch your infant. And when you feel that they are beginning to recognize the surroundings of their room, then that means that they've actually started to grasp details. When they are beginning to not just see the outside of your face, but actually the nose and the mouth and the eyes, and now they're beginning to see detail, and you can go into some more sophisticated type of pictures and different kinds of toys that you'll present.
And get them on the floor is so key, but safety is the key. But once you're on the floor with them, there's many different things. They could start to grasp a little bit of objects, but at 1.5, it's more they're just going to pat them. They're nothing huge, but that's, again, we were talking about. Right. We don't want to overlap things, but we're looking more the cognitive portion of what
now here's a cognitive activity you can do. Now let's move ahead a little bit more. Your child your infant's a little bit safer on the floor.
3 months?
2 months? 3 months. We're going to go 3 months, 3.5, 4. We talked about the concrete learning of a child. It's still of an infant. It's still here, but here's now where we begin the concept of object permanence. We begin to help that infant learn that just because something has dropped off the table or moved out of their field of vision, that it's not totally gone. And here's one of the neat things that I did with probably all the 4-month-olds, 3.5-month-olds, that when I would show parents this, that they would smile, they'd laugh. Some parents would actually stare incredulously and say, oh, I can't believe that my little one did this. But let's say you're doing a floor activity. You have them in the boppy, or they're on their belly. Take that toy, that ball, that rattle, and move it very, very slowly out of their field of vision. Let their heads turn, or let their eyes follow it. And then when it disappears, see if they linger there for just watch their eyes, watch their head. See if they linger there for maybe a split second, half second, a little bit longer. And what you'll begin to see is each time you do that with your child, they'll begin to learn that, oh, it's going to come back. Mm-hmm. And then they'll get bored of it and they'll say, I don't care if it comes back or not. But that's how we, again, begin to build expectations, memory.
Yes.
Really almost scientists, little scientists, in that they begin to expect, they get certain things. They know that certain things in the world will work in a certain way. The sun always comes up. The sun always goes down. And mom and dad always feed me when I start to cry because I'm really hungry.
So we take that focus and other things to the fingers. We talked about that before, and then see if they can follow the fingers around and do different things. So there's plenty of activities, and it goes back again to the hierarchy of needs, not just the floor time, which is more playtime, but then you go to feeding, rocking them, changing them. All those areas you can continue to involve cognitive things, talking to them more and more and more. The more they're awake, the more you talk to them. Not at night as much, but during the day, talk to them, interact with them. So 3-4 months, you're starting to finally hear a lot more coos.
Absolutely.
You're understanding what really makes them happy. They are recognizing who you are a little bit. And these are all things that really takes observation, Jared. Explain that it's not something like we could physically see when they're starting to crawl. We could physically see, we can picture and see when they're developing fine motor or gross motor skills or adaptive skills, but we can't, in speech, we can't really observe what's going on cognitively unless
I want to address, again, you mentioned coos, and wow, I completely slipped my mind and I forgot about that. But you're right, at 2-3 months, the first kind of verbal kind of language approach is beginning to start with your child, and that's the cooing. And those coos they touch every component, but let's focus just on the cognitive part of that. That the child, there's so much that infant has to do to be able to control that. So cognitively, their brain needs to send to them muscle control. They have to control the air that's expelled from their diaphragm up through the voice box. They have to produce that sound, and then they have to remember. Now, does it happen accidentally in the beginning? Yeah, probably. Yeah. But so many of the things that we learn are what we call in our house happy accidents. So the child, that infant, begins to learn, oh, I did this. I remember how I did this. And then I remember mom and dad's response to it, so I'm going to do it again. But that's the cognitive component of it, the memory built in to produce that. And now, of course, the child gets even just slightly older, and they begin to produce different kinds of cooing sounds. And for our audience, a coo is really just the basic vowel sounds, those nice soft ones, the ah, the ooh. But look at the way I had to change the shape of my mouth to do that.
And then maybe some strategies of getting them to coo more. We're going to look at that when we get back. More Total Education. Neil with Jarrett. My website, totaltutor.net. Twitter, TotalTutor. #parenting. That's a good way to kind of get us involved in that process. And we'll be back in just a moment.
Think you found every hazard out here today? Think again. The spot you missed could be a killer. That spot on your skin could be skin cancer. If you're a man over 50, you're in a group most likely to develop skin cancer, including melanoma, the kind that kills one person every hour. That's why your best shot is to check for a spot. It's easy. Follow through and check your skin. Go to spotskincancer.org to find out how. A message from the American Academy of Dermatology.
What are you doing, dear?
My finances. Every week I divide my allowance, some to spend, some to charity. But the first thing I do is set aside 10% to save for my future.
That's awfully grown up. Did you learn that in school?
No, Dad taught me. He said if you want something tomorrow, you have to save today. Dad's saving for retirement. I'm saving for a new bike.
Choose to save. To learn how to get started, get your free Power to Choose brochure.
He's a smart man, your father.
Is your body holding you back?
Where do you think you're going? I want to go running. Not with that knee, you're not.
Your bones and joints can say no at any age.
That's not a pick her up. What do you say?
Yet a lot of people in pain fight back.
Use your head. Save your back. My bride, my rules.
And regain their lives.
You gotta be kidding me.
Fight for your mobility. Visit anationinmotion.org. A message from the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons.
I'll take it from here.
We're back to Total Education with Neil, with my co-host Jarrett, and we're in the cognitive end of things, 2 to 3 months, child development. How important is that? It's so important, and I know so many parents out there have questions. And that's the funny thing. This is the area where they forget. They think, oh, it's just going to happen. But it's going to make your life a lot easier. You hear about temperaments of kids and different things. It's all the reaction of the parent. More and more, my good friend Maggie Stevens of the Parent Fix, parentfix.com, she's taught me something so important. She's taught me that it's not changing the behavior of the child. It's changing the behavior of the parent. And my Q&A show on the Total Education Network and my website, totaltutor.net, every week we have questions from parents that we answer. And what I've learned so much is from Maggie is we're not in control.
And that's pretty much the first thing I kind of remind parents of, especially the parents having their first child and they're bringing that infant home and they have the newborn. We're going to, for a very long time, we are going to be in their world.
I think you're going to be in their world forever.
Yes.
But it's all about consistency, but yet you got to see these temperaments, because my Anastasia is much different than Annika, much different than Max, that they develop. But you know Anastasia, but you didn't know her like you know her now. She's a tyrant. But we'll get to that.
She is strong-willed, is what
strong-willed, maybe, and then they're saying it's me, and that's what my mom says it's me. So I was the tyrant. I was the tyrant and the strong-willed child. Which I never knew, but I was an only child. Maybe that's why it wasn't so draining for my parents. If they had 4 other ones as draining as me, they probably would not be around right now.
Or they might have simply stopped because they had you and they realized that more than that would be too many to have to deal with.
So okay, the cooing. Strategies to get them to coo.
Okay, so now your infant is beginning to make these beautiful, wonderful sounds. And what you can do is you copy them back. Do it very slowly. The child is not going to do that kind of that reciprocating back and forth yet. But they are going to see the parents' reaction to it, and they will gradually learn. Maybe rapidly, maybe a little bit longer, but again, they're going to do it on their terms. But what you can do is your child makes that in the first sound you're probably going to hear because of the control, the oral motor control. It's going to be the ah. It's an easier sound to make, not the ooh so much. That's the one that I think we all respond to and love. But that ah or that ah sound, repeat that, but also go nice and slow so that your child can see how you're forming. So you're on the floor. You've just changed that diaper. They're fresh. Their legs are kicking. They're happy.
So we're looking at speech, but cognitively, how do we lead it?
Cognitively, they're learning how to control their breath. They're learning how to form.
But do you think they coo because of what we do? That's where I'm trying to. That's the kind of strategy I'm thinking about. Is that by us walking to the room, cheerful, smiling, are we going to have more of an opportunity of a coo than?
Absolutely. Yes, you're right. Absolutely.
It's the smile. It's the happiness. I only got 2 hours sleep, but hi everyone. Right. They're going to be more willing to coo. They're going to be more willing to feel comfortable and to react more.
Absolutely. You didn't get much sleep last night. Imagine if you would have come in, sat at this desk, began the show, you would have been slumped over, maybe your hand is like this. You didn't have that, you wouldn't have had that energy. Who would want to watch the show? people wouldn't respond the way that they're responding. So that carries it over, or the boss, the boss who comes in and doesn't say hello or greet their employees and is hard to predict, unpredictable, irrational. Who would want to be in that environment? None of us would. Would you learn in that environment? Maybe, but you wouldn't learn nearly as quickly as you would in an environment where the infant is feeling secure, feeling safe, and learns, here's the learning part, learns to count on their mom and dad, the caregivers that are a part of their life.
Absolutely. So the cooing is, what I'm looking at is the cognitive reaction to that. So we're getting reactions to certain things through cognitive. So we're going into, what's going to happen is we're going to see about the same thing happening based on their reaction, how they react for a diaper change. 6 months, are they going to fight? It's at 12 months. Are they going
definitely to 12 months?
Are they going to sleep through their nap? Are they going to go? When they're hungry, are they going to scream? Or are they going to be patient? All these things develop cognitively through us. We're more in control of what we do how they think based on our reactions.
Right, and here's what happens. You have the infant, you have that newborn. There is definitely cognitive ability. It's not all that sophisticated, but it's there and it's perfectly suited to their world. But so much of what they do is based on the nervous system. And what begins to happen is that we talked about this last week with adults where imagine if our brain didn't have filters. Imagine if our brain couldn't block out the jackhammer that's outside the window or 4 screaming kids while you're trying to feed the 5th one. We're not born with that, though. Our brain learns to do that. So an infant, the nervous system is really in total control. The cognitive ability, the cognitive development, the brain development of that child is what begins to control the nervous system. So you mentioned, does the infant begin to be able to wait even just a little bit for that food, that bottle, mom to
teach
come
them to
over?
wait? Because honestly, what I do at times is I'm not going to jump so quickly.
Early on, definitely.
Early, but no, I'm not talking. I'm talking max.
Right.
Absolutely. I'm not going to jump so quickly. Let me run to you, because this is the thing. If we give in to our kids so quickly, they think we can do it all the time. And if you have multiple children, you can't do that, or you're going to go crazy, moms and dads.
And that was one of the strategies that I would give to even a parent that had one child. I would say, let's just move a little bit slower. Let that infant see what you're doing. I'm getting there, honey. I'm going to get there with this food. I really will. I'm getting there.
And talking to them
absolutely
about
it. Stop crying. I'm coming with the food.
Or we're going to jump and grab and pick you up. We can even teach them in a way, because they have to learn to deal with these things. And
of course, I am going to say that I always think it's important to hold and cuddle and
but we're trying to hurry up and get that bottle. I know we'll pick them up at that point, but we're not going to pick them up. We teach them to wait, and that's a cognitive skill. That's a skill that's very important.
Well, what you're teaching them is how to. We see it as patience, but what you're teaching them is their brain begins to control their nervous system. And they begin
and it
to
leads a little bit like social emotional.
Absolutely,
it could go into social emotional and behavioral, which I don't think we've gone into, or we might have. I can't remember. We'll have to go back. We'll definitely go into that after adaptive. But the cognitive end of things is that they're learning. Really, ladies and gentlemen, we're not going to get into lots of how to teach cognitive skills until 2 years.
Yeah.
Because once they talk, that's when you have the WH questions. That will be when we go back around the mulberry bushes, because I wanted to go to 2, then go back to certain areas. As I said, we're taking you all the way up to college, and then that's what we're trying to do with our books, and that's what we're trying to do with the TV
and what
show.
We're looking here is, again, and you're right about the 2. 2 is when we start to, it's still concrete learning at that point, but you are beginning to develop some abstract thought, and that is the who questions, the what questions, the why questions that a 2-year-old might start to do. That's the foundation of abstract thought. From birth to the age of 1, maybe 1.5, even as long as 2, far as 2. We're still looking at so many just concrete things. And why that is so significant is that baby begins to learn to count on things. And you know, we can't get to abstract thought. We can't get to algebra and calculus and some of the philosophical questions that we even touch on this show. We can't get there without a foundation in the concrete. And that's the, you know, just even listening to you talk about these things and the response that I had from that young lady who was the server. You know, we started this show with this kind of simple goal, and that was a single simple goal of to make the world a different place, you know, to change the world. And what we said is we're going to start it with that small college radio station, and we're going to start it with one relationship at a time. And the goal is, so it's a simple goal, but it was ambitious, of course. But listening to you talk about it, it reminded me of what we started this whole project with.
Absolutely. When we get back, again, we're going to continue with Total Education with Neil. My website, totaltutor.net, Twitter, Total Tutor, Neil S. Haley, Facebook, LinkedIn, Neil Haley. Free, those are my personal pages to go ahead and friend me, ask me questions. Twitter is a great one, but Pittsburgh still has to learn what Twitter is in certain aspects. But hashtag me and just say, hey, ask me a question, and I will answer those questions. And I will follow you on Twitter, especially in involvement. When we get back, more finishing up this cognitive, because some of the things that we will do from 2 on, we can do earlier. We're just not going to get a reaction. We'll be back in just a moment.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
The torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans.
The American dream need not forever be deferred.
This is the richest and the most powerful country.
When I was younger, I didn't want to admit I had a serious disease. Because of my diabetes, I lost the sight in my left eye. Misconceptions continue to surround this monster public health issue, but the simple truth is, diabetes can often be prevented and complications avoided. You're not alone. Understand the realities of diabetes and know that you can manage it and lead a full, active life.
And now, another adventure with Savings Man.
This is great. Every day should be like this.
It will be when I retire in a few years. I've been planning and saving. Did you save for me?
Well, this is unexpected.
Where'd you come from? Out of the blue, just like an illness, an emergency, or
That's enough, Mr. Unexpected.
Savings Man.
There's still time to plan. Find out how at ChooseToSave.org with a ballpark estimate worksheet.
I will. Thanks, Savings Man.
No, thank you.
So visit ChooseToSave.org today.
We're back to Total Education with Neil with my co-host Jarrett. More cognitive ability, birth through adulthood, but only we're going into the early childhood stages of cognitive ability. And the thing that I have to touch upon, Jarrett, is honestly the measurability of birth to 2 cognitively is difficult to really gauge. When they start speaking, we could spot a lot of their reactions. Schedule has a lot to do with it. Are there anything else I'm missing in that you're seeing cognitively? Because a lot of the things we've touched upon in all the other areas, that's so far on this show. I don't want to jump in from another area of developmental therapy and say, let's just jump back. But what do you think?
Well, and you know, focusing in on that kind of first year of life, and maybe even moving a little bit beyond that from a cognitive situation, cognitive domain, but really before the true oral language starts, you know, mama, dad, you know, where they're using even single words and 1-word, 2-word phrases to kind of make sense of the world, get needs met. Before that, though, there's so many things. You mentioned that it can be hard to do. Well, hard to observe because so many things can be happening in all the areas, but cognitively especially. But we talked about, you know, now that child's 7, 8 months. They're mobile, either mobile through crawling or rolling or scooting, however they might do it. There are many things. You're now starting to teach cause and effect to your child. That's cognitive. So they begin to, so you close the lid on a box, and even if the child can't get there, that infant can't get it to open up, you open it for them. Or here's where you do hand over hand, and you pop you hit that little switch, that little lever, that the box pops open. You don't even have to do this with a real toy. You can or with a store-bought toy. You can make one your own out of just a plain old box, and you lift the lid on it so the child can begin to look inside it or have certain expectations. But here's where curiosity begins to come in. That 7-month-old will try to get into that box. They'll want to open it. Cognitively, they've learned, I need to see what's in here. How do I do that? It's actually a pretty neat thing to do. A child who doesn't have the finger control to open that lid on their own, does it mean that they won't open it? Absolutely not. They'll learn that I can knock it over.
A lot of play therapy between 1 and 2. They're doing a lot of things on their own, or 8 months to 2. They're doing, but not really talking through it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
they're
not
pointing
what
to
we
things.
think of
They're
language,
pointing things. They're grabbing things. They're eating. They're biting things. That's a good reminder for me. They're putting things in their mouth. That's another. Even though we talked about that's adaptive, that could be fine motor. But the cause and effect. Does this taste good? No, this doesn't taste good at all.
This is too hard. I can't do anything with this.
Or let me throw this. As Max will throw the ball at people and wail things at people. Now he'll take the in his pack and play. He'll grab the pop-up toy and throw it at one of her siblings. He has no idea why he threw it. He just wanted to throw it out, and he's just so strong, he just tosses it. But that he wanted to see what the effect of throwing it.
You know, Neil, you mentioned about putting things in their mouth, and yes, that's the oral connection to learning. I know that there are our audience out there, the parents out there, caregivers, that they'll say, oh yeah, if I put my child's pacifier, if I put my baby's pacifier in upside down, what do? They turn it around. They've learned. They've learned that, oh, I don't like the way that feels. And they've learned how to control it. Oh, I can flip it around. Now, early on, they might have just spit it right back out. But I've seen this with children, with those infants, with those textured balls and those rattles. They'll like one side of it better.
Right, exactly.
And if you give it to them with the other side, sometimes even before they put it in their mouth, they'll flip it around. So they've already learned, oh, I remember this side is bumpy. I don't like that side. I remember that side is smooth. I like that side better. But again, going back to what now imagine your child is not quite there in hand control and finger control. That doesn't mean that they won't demonstrate it cognitively. You know, I briefly touched on the child who can't hit the switch. They might find another way to do it. Another activity is just terrific to do as your child's beginning to creep forward or can sit a little bit on their own. Object permanence. Take that favorite toy that they might have and don't cover it completely with the cloth, because at that point they'll look somewhere else. But how do you start it? Cover it just a little bit. Cover half of it.
Exactly.
Let that child see. Let the infant see. Oh, it's still there. And what do? They pull the cloth away. Now the next step becomes you start covering it a little bit more. And before you know it, that whole thing is covered. And yet your child has learned, I still know that's there.
And the peekaboo is another cognitive skill. One thing that you have to remember, play therapy starts about 6 months. All those toys, start buying them all. Don't get the bells and whistle toys. Please don't. They don't work. Again, these companies out there, they're just trying to entertain kids, and they entertain them for 5 seconds. Right. One thing that I'm a huge fan of are toys where the kids can come up with their own ideas, not the toy does it for them. That's leading to laziness and to consumerism.
Well, now that's what we really, I'm glad that you used that word. Absolutely. And as parents, you know, we want to do what's best for our children. And so, you know, we see these things. It doesn't mean we're bad people. It simply means that, oh, my child has to have that. You know, that's going to make my child smarter, better, nicer, healthier. We have to get that. We have to mortgage the house to go out and buy that. But as we learned, one of my favorite things to do as a therapist was to come into a home and have a handmade toy. and say to the parent, hey, did you see how I did this?
Yeah.
How about I just let you have it? Next week we'll work on one together, or maybe you
Right.
or Dad can make this, and I'll get it back from you next week. You can have it this week, but why don't you see if you can make it? And if you don't get there because you didn't have enough time, hey, don't worry about it. I'll bring some supplies and we'll make that. The key here then is you have to make sure that the toy that you make is totally safe.
And that's a great strategy for sure to get them. But one thing that I'm very concerned, families' houses that I went that were very poor, they would have some of the bells and whistles, probably a better TV than I have, but yet no toys. Toys, and this is where I should create a blog and write a blog on the types of toys that really work. Now, honestly, you go to my house now, they're mostly lost. Poor Max has to fend for himself. I'm sorry, but he has toys he plays with. He does a lot of things where he'll take toys that are parts of each toy, put one thing in a box. Oh, it's in the box. Take it back out, put it back in again. Oh, it's the box. Oh, cool. When the Christmas tree is up, he would go crawl, hit the star. Then he'd crawl over here, and then he'd crawl to this corner, and then he'd crawl back, then he'd try to walk. So he was using his reasoning. He was reasoning what happens when I do this, or what happens when I pull on someone's hair. He doesn't mean to pull on his hair, but this is all cognitive development.
Oh, and Neil, wow, the fact that you just mentioned the thing about pulling, now that's something we don't necessarily want to happen, but here's what you can do for your young one, your infant, 7 months of age. Take that toy, and we all remember the Fisher-Price phone with the little string on it that big, and you would pull it, and the eyes would wiggle, or it would. Now, but that is a great. It's fine motor skill, it's problem solving, but problem solving is cognitive. Place that toy out of the reach of your little one, your 8-month-old.
Right.
Let them problem solve on how to get it. It's a super neat thing. Now, do you need to go out and buy that? No. You can take a shoelace. Take a piece of string that's not going to fray apart. Tie it to a rattle. And now let your child play with that rattle. Your 7-month-old, sitting up. They're sitting up. They're maybe balanced in the boppy or a bumbo, or they're sitting on their own, which is fantastic. Take that little rattle. You've tied the string onto it, and now you say, "Oh, Max, Davey, the rattle's out of your reach. What are we going to do?" And then show them. But look at this string. What can we do with that? And now you've developed a cognitive experience for them. I begin to reach for that string, and I get it, and now I can put the rattle in my mouth. That's how an older child learns to say, "Oh, my favorite card's way underneath the couch, along with potato chips."
He throws his pacifier all the time.
Right, pacifier. And what do they begin to do? It's the neatest thing. It's so cool when the child says, "Oh, is there a yardstick here?" Or maybe that long wooden spoon. They begin to make a tool.
Exactly.
And, you see this again, but it starts with the string, and that can be the tool that you can teach them with. You mentioned, I have to, you said Max will put something in a box, take it out again. How old is he now?
He's 18 months now.
Okay, 18 months. We can even do this earlier. Do this as early as you want, really, when your child is safe, but 8 or 9 months, your child's sitting up. Start with one object in the box. Then put a second object in the box. Watch your child. Watch your 8-month-old's reaction when they open it up. And now they have to choose. Now, they might put both hands in there and pull them out. But here's it. We talked about something you can do. Your little one, your 6-month-old is on the ground. And maybe they're not as wiggly as they will be later on. Give them, parents, it's a great opportunity. Give them 2 rattles.
Right.
So now they have both rattles in the hand. You know what I'm going to say next. Now introduce a third toy. Watch what they do. There's a whole bunch of confusion. I only have 2 hands. What am I going to do? And what do we always see happen? Accidentally, one flies out and they grab the other one. But before long, it's not an accident anymore. Now, they don't drop it nicely. They're going to launch that toy that's in their hand. They're going to throw it this way, that way, up in the air. They don't care about that. They're simply saying, I have to let go of this to get that. That's cognitive.
Now, think of also the cognitive. Let's go quickly to toys. Pop-up toys, Star Stacker, such a fantastic toy. Hammer, the ability to, the Etch-a-Sketch thing we talked about. Any toy that does not make noises is fine. Yeah. There's a lot of great toys out there to involve the Jack in the Box type of deal. All those things are there. And the last thing, when we talk about cognitive, Jared, and this is where we're kind of closing the show and we're closing the adaptive next week, is the bottom line when we think about cognitive is we need to keep talking to him throughout the process. Like Max is counting now. Max is already able to say his ABCs. That's not a normal 18-month-old, but we're not going to, but basically what I'm saying is it's through us talking. We don't know what our kids will do, but cognitively they learn through our reaction, how we talk, how we develop.
And let's just touch on what Max is 18 months, he's singing his ABCs, he's saying them. And we may have skeptics out there and say, well, doesn't mean he's
able to count up too.
Right. Doesn't mean he's able to read, or he can count, but it doesn't mean he understands quantity. Well, you're right. I would say to those skeptics out there and say, well, absolutely you're right. But here's what he is demonstrating. He's demonstrating sequence.
Yeah.
He's demonstrating memory. Yes. When Max recites, so if he's doing that already, I would say to that parent, hey, when you sing a song to your child, stop, pause, see if your child says the next word. That's pretty amazing.
He does it. He does the Caillou for Caillou.
There you go. That's pretty amazing because the child is demonstrating memory. And now, of course, they're learning social engagement, but they are saying to you, I know what comes next. So, again, we talked about this. There are many people out there that would say, well, the fact that a child cries to be fed doesn't mean they're talking. I would say it sure does. Sign language. We're learning sign language. We're teaching our son sign language for the future. There was a time when sign language was not recognized as a language, exactly. And now we do recognize it. But for those people that say that language can only be oral, I would simply say, what about sign language?
Unbelievable. We're running out of time. Remember to go to my website, toldtutor.net, Twitter, ToldTutor, Neil S. Haley, Facebook, LinkedIn, Neil Haley. Next month we're gonna go into adaptive behaviors, which I have hardly any expertise in, but I will try to delve into it with Jarrett, who's definitely the developmental therapist expert, as we're taking you through birth through 2, but also birth to college. Have a great month. We'll talk next month. Good day, everyone.
Just imagine what a little time can do for your family.
And now, another adventure with Savings Man.
This is great. Every day should be like this.
It will be when I retire in a few years. I've been planning and saving. Did you save for me?
Well, this is unexpected.
Where'd you come from? Out of the blue, just like an illness, an emergency, or
That's enough, Mr. Unexpected.
Savings Man.
There's still time to plan. Find out how at choosetosave.org with a ballpark estimate worksheet.
I will. Thanks, Savings Man.
No, thank you.
So visit choosetosave.org today.
The American Legion. We're a powerful force for the nation. We pledge ourselves to our veterans, our youth, a strong national defense, and Americanism. These 4 pillars shape our work and what we do for America. We work relentlessly within our 4 pillars of service, and we succeed. We're committed to making sure all veterans receive the benefits they deserve for the sacrifices they've made in service to America. We support and promote citizenship and integrity in America's future leaders. We know what policies, tools, and manpower our military needs to protect this great country. We fight to get these things done. We're patriots through and through. We promote and defend these values every day in communities across the nation. Go to Legion.org to find out more about the American Legion's commitment of service to America.